734. This is regarding the patient surrogate issue. And there is a sub that I will offer. It's an S3 sub for House Bill 4418, which would add language specifying that the bill would not limit a surrogate's authority to act under the Dignified Death Act. So I want to thank all the stakeholders who came together to work on that language. And are there any testimony cards?
There are some cards that have been submitted, Madam Chair. Not wishing to speak in support of House Bill 4418, Sam Champagne, representing Henry Ford Health. Also not wishing to speak in support of House Bill 4418, 4419, and 4734, Rob Kennedy, Michigan Guardianship Association. Not wishing to speak in support of House Bill 4418, 4419, and 4734, Michelle Lindsay, representing Disability Rights Michigan. Also not wishing to speak in support of House Bill 4418, 4419, and 4734, Sherry Boyd, representing ARC Michigan. And the last card I have, Mary Pollack, representing the Michigan State Employee Retirees Association. Not wishing to speak in support, again, of House Bill 4418, 4419, and 4734. And those are all the cards, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much. I will make a motion to adopt the S3 version of House Bill 4418. Will the clerk please call the question?
Chair Chang.
Yes.
Senator Schenck. Senator Voino.
Yes.
Senator Irwin.
Yes.
Senator Santana.
Yes.
Senator Runstead.
Yes.
Madam Chair, on the motion to adopt the S3 version of House Bill 4418, there are 5 yeas, 0 nays. The substitute is adopted.
I'll entertain a motion to report House Bill 4419 to the floor with recommendation that it pass. Motion made.
Excuse me, are we reporting this one? 4418 S3, we're reporting it? I'm sorry.
That's right.
Okay.
We're also going to entertain a motion first to report House Bill 4418, the S3, to the floor with recommendation that it pass. Motion made by Senator Voino. Will the clerk please call the question?
Chair Chang.
Yes.
Senator Schenck. Senator Voino.
Yes.
Senator Irwin.
Yes.
Senator Santana.
Yes.
Senator Runstead.
Yes.
Senator Johnson. Madam Chair, on the motion to report House Bill 4418 S3, there are 5 yeas, 0 nays. The bill is reported.
I'll entertain a motion to report House Bill 4419 to the floor with recommendation that it pass. Motion made by Senator Irwin. Will the clerk please call the question?
Chair Chang.
Yes.
Senator Schenck. Senator Voino.
Yes.
Senator Irwin.
Yes.
Senator Santana.
Yes.
Senator Runstead.
Yes.
Senator Johnson. Madam Chair, on the motion to report House Bill 4419, there are 5 yeas, 0 nays. The bill is reported.
I will also entertain a motion to report House Bill 4734 to the floor with recommendation that it pass. Motion made by Senator Santana. Will the clerk please call the question?
Chair Chang.
Yes.
Senator Schenck. Senator Voino.
Yes.
Senator Irwin.
Yes.
Senator Santana.
Yes.
Senator Runstead.
Yes.
Senator Johnson. Madam Chair, on the motion to report House Bill 4734, there are 5 yeas, 0 nays. The bill is reported.
Thank you so much. Also, last year, we heard testimony about Senate Bill 502, sponsored by Senator Schenck. Senator Irwin has an amendment or a sub.
Yep. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm offering an S1 amendment that adds a definition of the term reckless disregard and defines it as consciously disregarding a substantial and unjustifiable risk that a communication will be viewed as threatening violence. And I want to thank the ACLU and the other stakeholders who worked on this language to get it to where it's at.
Thank you so much. Are there any additional cards?
Yes, Madam Chair, we have 2 testimony cards. Not wishing to speak in support of Senate Bill 502, Matt Saxton, representing the Michigan Sheriff's Association. Also not wishing to speak neutral on the bill, Liz Black, representing ACLU of Michigan. And that is all of the testimony cards. They supported.
I will entertain a motion to adopt the S1 of Senate Bill 502. Motion made by Senator Irwin. Will the clerk please call the question?
Chair Chang.
Yes.
Senator Schenck. Senator Voino.
Yes.
Senator Irwin.
Yes.
Senator Santana.
Yes.
Senator Runstead.
Yes.
Senator Johnson. Madam Chair, on the motion to adopt the S1 version of Senate Bill 502, there are 5 yeas, 0 nays. The substitute is adopted.
I'll entertain a motion to report the Senate Bill 502, the S1, to the floor with recommendation that it pass. Motion made by Senator Santana. Will the clerk please call the question?
Chair Chang.
Yes.
Senator Schenck. Senator Voino.
Yes.
Senator Irwin.
Yes.
Senator Santana.
Yes.
Senator Runstead.
Yes.
Senator Johnson. Madam Chair, on the motion to report Senate Bill 502S1, there are 5 yeas, 0 nays. The bill is reported.
Thank you so much. Now we are going to pick up where we left off on Senate Bills 508, 509, 510, as well as Senate Resolution 86. I will just note that Senate Resolution 86, what it does is simply urge Congress to pass their bills at the federal level regarding masks and regarding sensitive locations. And they parallel the bills that we previously heard testimony on in November. We do have Representative Mai Zong here. She is a sponsor of one of the House bills, so would like you to come up and speak. I will say also before we start hearing testimony, we have a lot of people who want to speak, and so we'll be limiting the speakers to 3 minutes. We'll be using a timer, and then for committee members, if we can stick to questions, not comments, and limit to 1 question per testifier, we will be able to keep things on track. So Representative Song, we'd love to hear from you.
In support of a package of bills, Senate Bill 508, 09, and 10, children born here in Michigan whose parents have been detained and deported by our federal government are now living in fear. At home, they're afraid to open their doors if they see someone outside because they think they are going to be next. They don't understand why our federal government is tearing their families apart. This is the reality for many families in your district and mine. We all want to live in safe neighborhoods free of crime and violence, but when you give a department billions of dollars with no oversight, what you get is an out-of-control agency masked, no pun intended, as a criminal law enforcement agency. Our law enforcement agents should not be breaking down doors, entering churches, hospitals, schools, or courtrooms with military-grade weapons and without judicial warrants. If you're entering a school to detain an individual, you are likely taking a child or an educator. If you're entering a hospital to detain an individual, you are likely taking a healthcare worker, medically frail patient, or guest visiting their loved one. If you're entering a court building to detain an individual, you are likely taking a person who willingly showed up that morning who is trying to do it the right way, or a witness or a victim. If you're crashing a wedding or a funeral to detain an individual, you're likely terrorizing guests and creating unsafe and dangerous conditions for all those who are attending the most vulnerable or joyful moments of their life. If you're entering a place of worship to detain an individual, you're likely taking a member of your very own church, mosque, or temple, not the worst of the worst. Let's be very clear. ICE is not a criminal law enforcement agency. Its job is to enforce immigration laws, deportation, removal orders, which are entirely civil proceedings. Targeting our neighbors in sensitive locations is not who we are as Michiganders. It is not who we should be as Americans. This isn't the country that my family, my father, and my grandfather fought so bravely for so that I could be here before you today. It isn't the country we recognize as a country of immigrants. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free, the wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless, tempest toast to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door. Our country has always been a beacon and a leader for the entire world, and yet it is crumbling right before our very own eyes. Our federal government is tearing families apart. ICE is making Americans feel unsafe. Michiganders should be able to go about their daily lives without living in fear or having to carry their documentation with them everywhere they go. And right now, the current policies in the immigration system are failing. I often hear my colleagues say that they want less government control, more local control. With these bills, we have the power to take back control of the safety of Michigan families. These bills are necessary to address the chaos and the overreach. Michiganders deserve to live free of fear and persecution from their very own government. And with that, happy to take any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much. Thank you for sponsoring legislation in the House and for being a fierce advocate for your community. We have a question from Senator Runstead.
Well, I'm sure we're going to hear the entire testimony all the way through that it's immigrants conflating illegal and legal because it's very juicy to put it that way. The reality is that I don't think there's a person in Lansing or in the state of Michigan who has a problem with legal immigration. This is strictly about people here illegally. And the idea that anyone who would be picked up has to be a nurse, anyone who is in a courtroom is an innocent person who came in to testify. Obviously, this is ridiculous on the face of it. You could have people that have committed crimes, and I've got a whole list of murders and rapes in Michigan.
Senator, if you could ask the question, that would be great.
This is going to be I can't rebut anything that the testimony. All I could do is ask a question.
I stated earlier that this is our second hearing. If you could ask a question, then we can keep going. Thank you.
This is a kangaroo court.
Thank you, Senator. We do know that naturalized U.S. citizens and U.S. citizens are being targeted by ICE. This is an overreach, and we want to make sure that everybody is safe wherever they are going about their daily life. And I will agree with you that we should focus on the worst of the worst, but unfortunately, the vast majority of people that have been detained by ICE have no criminal record and came here lawfully and legally.
The statistics are of 750,000, over 70% either have committed a crime or charged with a crime. Those are the statistics that came out of the federal government.
Thank you for your testimony. We'll remind members again that we are asking questions. We are not making statements, and we will proceed to Representative Betsy Kofia, who has joined us on Zoom, who is also a sponsor of one of the bills in the House.
Thank you.
Representative? Representative Kofia, feel free to begin your testimony. All right, while we are figuring that out, okay, I guess the people on Zoom are saying they can't hear anything.
Okay. Check is on their way.
All right, we will figure that out. In the meantime, we will move on. Next, we're going to hear
Good
from...
Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Are you able to hear me all right?
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you.
Yes, I can hear you.
I can hear you.
All right, Representative Kofia, if you could start your testimony, that would be great. And go ahead.
Unfortunately, Madam Chair, we were having those of us on Zoom were not able to hear you. I think maybe we're okay now.
Yes, if you could begin your testimony, that would be great. And as a reminder for everyone on Zoom, we are limiting to 3 minutes per speaker. Thank you, Representative.
Yes. Thank you so much, Madam Chair, and thank you, members of the committee, for the opportunity to speak to you. I apologize to not be there in person. I had an illness in the family, so I had to head home, but appreciate the opportunity to testify in support of Senator Moss's bill, Senate Bill 510, which is a sort of mirror of a bill that I introduced last July, having to do with the topic of not having masked armed secret police with no markings in the United States of America. I will try brief.
Just so you know, I think there's a lag because your testimony just went live at the Senate hearing. So I think there's technical difficulties. Unless you are able to be heard now, I'm not
It's okay.
sure.
The lag will just be on Senate TV. Just keep going, okay? So, Representative, you could continue with your testimony.
Thank
that
you
would be
so
great.
much.
Thanks.
Yeah, so I wanted to bring attention, I am in support of Senator Moss's bill, and I wanted to bring attention to a rather remarkable issue that has occurred in my district here in northern Michigan, as well as in other parts of the state. Our federally recognized tribes I have one in my district, Grand Traverse Band of Ottawa and Chippewa Indians, and they have actually had to go to the extraordinary measure, something I've never seen, in which they had to put out a public bulletin warning tribal citizens to carry their papers and be prepared to prove to Immigrations and Customs Enforcement, these masked entities, that they are in fact legally here. And I want to pause on the absurdity of that reality, that tribal citizens who were here for hundreds of years before my ancestors stepped foot on this land are actually being detained by these federal agents in masks with guns across this country. It has caused real, serious culture of fear, across the country, including in my district in northern Michigan. I had a call from one of my school leaders who has one of the most diverse districts in my area, who said that his entire population of both Native and Latino students, the families were so fearful that they actually kept them all home. So we had a huge hole in his attendance on a recent school day. This culture of fear and intimidation is having real consequences for the people of our state and our country and for our tribal nations. And so I am deeply in support of the bill package that is being put forward by the Senate. And with the remainder of my testimony, I want to uplift what my Grand Traverse Band Tribal Chairwoman, Sandra Witherspoon, stated to me in support of this package of legislation. She stated that the Grand Traverse Band, excuse me, I just need to look at my notes. She said the use of heavily armed, masked federal agents operating while masked in unmarked vehicles and employing pretextual or Kavanaugh-style investigative stops to detain individuals raises profound constitutional, moral, and historical concerns. These practices function in effect as racial profiling and create a pervasive climate of fear, particularly for communities of color, tribal citizens, and immigrants, many of whom are lawfully present and U.S. citizens. History teaches us that secrecy and the exercise of state power is dangerous. Masked officers wielding federal authority without clear identification erode the rule of law and evoke the darkest chapters of state-sanctioned disappearances and intimidation. Such practices do not make our communities safer. They fracture public trust, deter cooperation with legitimate law enforcement, and increase the risk of tragic and irreversible harm, including the detention, injury, or death of individuals in ICE custody. That I really wanted to convey the message that this is touching every corner of the state. Several other federally recognized tribes have felt compelled to actually put out similar warnings to their own Native members. And let's think about that. Who is ICE and Customs and Border Patrol? Where are they going to deport Native Americans? This has gone far too far, and I am appreciative again of this committee and you, Madam Chair, for bringing this forward. And with that, I can yield it back over to you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your testimony. We have a question from Senator Runstead.
So you just made a lengthy case for Native Americans born in Michigan going through the deportation process. Do you have cases of this that you could provide to the committee where a legally born here, a Native American citizen has been deported?
So thank you so much, Senator Runstead, for that question. And I want to reflect the irony of the question of deporting Native Americans who were here long before our ancestors arrived. It is ironic.
It seems ridiculous.
It is ironic, and the problem is that there are multiple documented cases, which I'm happy to provide to your office and the committee, in Arizona, in Minnesota, and other places where Native members, simply for not looking like me, are being stopped by masked, armed federal agents, detained in some cases. The deportation, again, that's a bizarre question because where would you deport them to? But the issue that the tribal chairwoman raises is that we are in a state of racial profiling of people simply for not looking white, and it is making a culture that is dangerous both for tribal members and communities of color across.
Do you have evidence of these detained? It's a question. It's a question. Do you have evidence of people detained?
Senator, I'm happy to provide you all of the documentation for these stops that have been made by these armed federal agents.
Thank you. Next, we are going to hear from, I'm going to bring up two individuals together, Johanna Kononen from the Michigan Coalition to End Domestic and Sexual Violence, as well as Jessica Glynn, who is the Vice President of Victim Services at the YWCA Kalamazoo.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Senators. Thank you so much for having me today. My name is Johanna Kononen, and I serve as the Associate Director at the Michigan Coalition to End Domestic and Sexual Violence. The Coalition is a nonprofit organization made up of 73 agencies that provide services to survivors of domestic and sexual violence and human trafficking across the state. Our member programs serve every county in Michigan. We provide training, technical assistance, and advocacy for those member programs, including legislative education and advocacy such as this. I've been an attorney representing victims of domestic and sexual violence for 20 years, and I have seen firsthand the impact that domestic sexual violence and human trafficking service providers have on people fleeing dangerous and often potentially lethal situations. Today, the coalition asks that you support Senate Bill 508, designating sensitive locations off limits from immigration enforcement. As the prior speakers had noted, sensitive locations under this bill include schools, places of worship, hospitals, courthouses, daycares, locations providing assistance for children and pregnant women, and organizations such as those that the coalition represents that provide assistance to victims of crime or abuse. All of these locations have important things in common. They're filled with people who serve their communities and feel a deep responsibility to care for those who are in need of our help. When things go wrong, when people are scared, we tell them to look for the helpers. Look around this room today. This room is filled with helpers. We all want to help those who need it, and we don't ask questions about who the person is, we just help them. For domestic and sexual violence agencies, they are required to provide services to anyone who asks, often in a crisis situation. This bill recognizes these locations and the services they provide as sensitive and important. If immigration enforcement can occur inside a domestic violence shelter, it is no longer a safe location, not just for an immigrant, but for all survivors residing in the shelter. People seek the services of domestic and sexual violence and human trafficking providers when they are scared and fleeing violence. No shelter should worry that residents might be subject to or witness additional trauma or forced removal while in their care. Domestic and sexual violence agencies have years of experience navigating law enforcement investigations and questioning. Federal law requires domestic and sexual violence agencies to have robust confidentiality policies that protect vulnerable survivors from identification. Our programs do not ask for someone's papers when they arrive in a crisis because we don't need them to help. In fact, we're required by law to provide services to people who do not have identification. It is a tactic of perpetrators to destroy vital documents. I have represented many survivors who have had their and their children's birth certificates, social security cards, passports, and immigration papers burned or shredded. I have represented survivors who perpetrator has threatened to have them deported despite their citizenship or legal status. Survivors who seek the services of these agencies are often fleeing the combined trauma of violence and homelessness, and they should not fear being turned away from help because they can't prove their citizenship. Citizen or not, survivors fleeing violence qualify for our services, and yet if immigration enforcement is allowed to proceed in these sensitive spaces, they might be too scared to use them. Victims of crime are less inclined to report criminal behavior or seek services if they must worry that they also have to prove who they are. Often a perpetrator's greatest threat is that they're the only one who can help and that the victim has nowhere to go. Allowing immigration enforcement in shelter spaces gives power to perpetrators' threats and could unintentionally trap survivors in violent relationships, successfully preventing them from seeking help. True safety comes from trust. Domestic and sexual violence service providers have earned the trust of their communities because survivors know they can access help, shelter, and services, and those agencies do not share their information. These agencies have a reputation for safety, and that means ensuring everyone, regardless of their immigration status, can access these vital services. The safety we seek is not just for those individuals seeking help, but for our communities as well. And we ask that you support Senate Bill 508.
Thank you very much. And then we'll hear next from our next testifier, and then we'll ask questions of both of you.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the committee. I'm here today to ask for your support of Senate Bills 508 through 510. My name is Jessica Glynn. I'm the Vice President at Victim Services at YWCA Kalamazoo, and I too have been an attorney for over 20 years serving survivors of domestic and sexual violence, human trafficking, stalking, and teen dating violence. At YWCA Kalamazoo, our mission is rooted in the elimination of racism, the empowerment of women, and the promotion of peace, justice, freedom, and dignity for all. For decades, we have lived through this mission by providing comprehensive, trauma-informed, life-saving programs and support to individuals fleeing violence in many forms, including human trafficking, stalking, domestic and intimate partner violence, and sexual violence. Every year, our organization serves hundreds of individuals and families across Southwest Michigan, including 471 survivors of intimate partner and domestic violence, 120 survivors of sexual assault, and 142 survivors of human trafficking in 2025 alone. These numbers speak more than to just services rendered. They represent YWCA Kalamazoo's commitment to serving everyone who walks through our doors, regardless of race, class, immigration status, and sexual orientation. For survivors of domestic violence, sexual assault, and human trafficking, safety is not theoretical. It is immediate, fragile, and often the difference between life and death. These survivors already face immense barriers to escaping abuse. When fear of immigration enforcement is added to the equation, many never seek help at all. Domestic violence organizations, rape crisis centers, trafficking shelters, hospitals, and legal advocacy programs are not just service providers. They are lifelines. Survivors come to these spaces in moments of extreme vulnerability, often fleeing violence, with nothing but the clothes they're wearing, sometimes with children in tow, often under surveillance or threats from their abuser. For immigrant survivors in particular, fear of immigration enforcement is one of the most powerful tools of control used by abusers and traffickers. Survivors are routinely told, if you call the police, you will be deported, or if you go to a shelter, they'll take your children away. These threats are effective because they exploit real uncertainty and real risk. Without clear protections for sensitive areas, survivors are forced to choose between enduring abuse or risking detention, deportation, or family separation. That is not a real choice. These bills address this reality directly. By designating domestic violence organizations and similar survivor-serving locations as protected spaces, these bills remove a critical barrier to safety and recovery. They allow survivors to seek medical care, counseling, shelter, and legal advocacy without the constant fear that asking for help will trigger immigration consequences. This matters not only for individual survivors, but for public safety as a whole. When survivors feel safe accessing services, they're more likely to report abuse, cooperate with investigations, seek protective orders, and participate in the judicial system. When they are afraid, violence remains hidden, traffickers operate with impunity, and cycles of abuse continue unchecked. Protecting sensitive locations strengthens, not weakens, our ability to address violent crime. These bills are also carefully and responsibly crafted. They do not provide impunity for criminal activity, and they do not interfere with law enforcement acting under a judicial warrant.
Sorry, we're a little over.
Thanks.
Yeah, okay.
Judicial warrant or in exigent circumstances. Instead, they establish clear, common sense boundaries that prioritize safety in spaces designated to serve victims.
Thank you both for the important work that you do. I appreciate it. We do have a question from Senator Brunstad.
Two quick questions. First, I've heard so much information in the last 2 weeks that is completely inaccurate as to where ICE is going or not going. Do you have any evidence that ICE has broke into or barged into a crisis center and picked up someone on their immigration status?
So we've been in touch with sister organizations in Chicago that had large enforcement actions, and they were parked outside of the domestic violence court and shelters. We do have firsthand reports as well of ICE actually sexually assaulting survivors in Minneapolis, and those survivors not being able to reach help in hospitals in Minneapolis after they were assaulted.
Filed any reports on these assaults?
They have, yeah.
And those are those currently, can you provide those? Is it currently before the court system of ICE raping?
That have been filed in courts?
Yeah, you could provide that to us. ICE have been raping these people?
So we've been receiving reports, again, from attorneys working in Minneapolis who are representing.
I've heard reports.
Yeah, who are representing these survivors.
She gets 3 minutes. I can't even finish my question without your interruption.
You can ask a question. You asked a question, and I had said earlier one question per senator.
You're constraining anything they say I have to accept. I cannot rebut anything at all.
You are certainly welcome to ask a question, which you did. So we are going to move move on.
I had a
The
second
next
question.
testifier
The second
was
question.
Austin
I'm
Lowe's.
going to
He
ask
was,
my second question. The censorship is ridiculous.
It is
in this
not
committee.
censorship. I
These
was
are
very
women who've
clear
been
in the
raped and
beginning of the
murdered
testimony.
in Michigan across the country by illegal immigrants.
So Austin,
Have
if you could join us
testified
at
on
the
behalf of any
testimony
of them?
table. Austin Lowe's, he is the chairman
To me, it's
of
a
the
joke.
Sault Ste. Marie Tribe of Chippewa Indians. I was very clear. Again, and I will restate for the third or fourth time that, again, we've got a lot of testifiers just literally for the sake of respect for the folks who have been here, who are here.
For censorship.
We can hear 3 minutes from each speaker and then one question from our committee members. Thanks so much for driving all the way down here.
Thank you, Chair Chang and members of the Senate Civil Rights, Judiciary, and Public Safety Committee for the opportunity to testify in support of Senate Bills 508 through 510 and Senate Resolution 86 to offer protections to Michigan citizens and tribal residents, along with visibility to law enforcement activity across Michigan. My name is Austin Lowe's, and I'm the elected chairman of the Sault Ste. Marie Tribe of Chippewa Indians. And I'm here today because just this week I took the proactive measure to alert my 50,000 plus members of their rights as tribal and U.S. citizens. Right now across Indian country, Michigan, and the United States, we are seeing tactics by federal agents that are stoking fear, mistrust, and aggravating already heightened nerves. My tribe has taken a proactive approach to also prepare our various departments on how they can handle immigration enforcement situations that may arise on tribal properties. We are especially focused on making sure that our tribal school, our housing programs, and our tribal service programs understand what is allowable conduct by law enforcement agents and that they're knowledgeable in how to handle sensitive situations should they come up. Our people are especially attuned to understanding unlawful encroachments onto the rights and our sovereignty as a tribal nation. Minority communities are often disproportionately impacted by law enforcement operations, and methods that increase fear do not result in de-escalated outcomes. Instead, they only lead to more generational trauma, which further divides us. I must point out that the irony that tribal communities are now being forced to demonstrate their citizenship in a country where we are the first residents is not lost on us. Both federal and state law enforcement agents have operated unmasked in this state and with transparency for many years. The recent rise of masked federal agents operating throughout the country to detain individuals, often without badges or any indication of what agency they're from, has led to increased fear and anxiety in our country and throughout Indian country. As a tribal community on the border between the United States and Canada, immigration and border enforcement efforts are common in our surrounding communities. And we have long had a strong relationship between our law enforcement and our federal and state partners. This strong relationship is and has been premised on the mutual respect for tribal, state, and federal sovereignty at play. It has been built and nurtured on transparency and of the rule of law. The proposed changes before you today would add a level of accountability and transparency that would start rebuilding the public's trust in law enforcement activity. It would help quell some of the fear and anxiety sweeping across the nation, the state and tribal communities, and it would also hopefully restore adherence to the rule of law. Again, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to testify in support of this package, along with your leadership in moving forward legislation to strengthen protection for Michigan citizens, tribal citizens, and to finally provide transparency for law enforcement entities. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your leadership and for your testimony. Senator Irwin?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to thank you, Chairman Lowe's, for coming to testify and speaking on behalf of your large membership and also the concerns I'm hearing from other members of tribal communities across Michigan. One of the things that I've heard publicly when I've spoke out against some of the reckless and illegal things that I see happening in the streets of America, one of the things I hear pushback from folks who look at things differently than me is that, hey, there's no harm being done when folks are accosted on the street and demanded to produce their paperwork and prove their citizenship. And I try to point out to them that maybe it's a little bit easier for someone like me than it is for some of your other members. And so I guess I want to ask you, can you talk to me about how this kind of enforcement affects your members? Because when I think about the prospect of one of my loved ones being detained, being swept off of the street or from in front of a grocery store or out of their car and taken to an undisclosed location where I don't know where they were, I think about the fear and the worry that would bring to me and to them. And I know that many of your members who don't look like me are experiencing that. So I just want to invite you to talk about that harm that's being done.
Yeah, I'd be happy to, and that's a wonderful question. So we have a large membership, and a lot of our membership has darker skin than I do as well, and they're filled with anxiety at this time because the way that ICE is currently operating, they're operating based on racial profiling. So if you're a tribal citizen, if you have dark skin that could confuse you for maybe someone of Hispanic heritage, you can be racially profiled. And although the Snyder Act, otherwise known as the Indian Citizen Act of 1924, grants full citizenship to Native Americans in this country, which means there's nowhere to deport you to as a U.S. citizen, it's still a terrible situation being stopped, detained, harassed, intimidated, and sometimes assaulted simply due to the color of your skin. So we're filled with anxiety right now. One of the things that tribal governments have been doing, we've been issuing more tribal IDs just to be able to prove that a person is of citizenship to this country. But it shouldn't happen. It shouldn't happen to Native communities, and there's a reason why tribes throughout this country have given that public statement.
Thank you so much. We have a question from Senator Runstead. Thank you again for your leadership. We appreciate it. Up next, we are going to hear from Sherry Rendell from FAIR.
And distinguished members of the committee. My name is Sherry Rendell. I am the Director of State and Local Engagement at FAIR, which is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization of concerned individuals who believe our immigration laws must be reformed to serve our nation's interests. We were founded in 1979. We have 3 million members nationwide, including 10,600 in Michigan. I did submit written testimony back in November, but I feel strongly that opposition to 508, 509, and 510 was warranted for me to fly out. Sensitive location legislation creates a bright line that would prohibit immigration enforcement. This bright line is not needed because there is no indication that immigration officials currently conduct general or exploratory raids at sensitive locations. Rather, they utilize their discretion and good judgment to determine whether to enter a sensitive location. Generally, officers enter a sensitive location because they believe a specific targeted individual will be present at that particular location. Furthermore, officers entering these locations seek to minimize enforcement impact by ensuring their actions are discreet. ICE data from 2018, fiscal year 2018 to 20, shows that ICE exercised authority to enter sensitive locations sparingly. Moreover, not creating a blanket prohibition is crucial. Courthouses are not sensitive locations. ICE knows that individuals in locations like a courthouse are unarmed. It is safer for the individual. It is safer for law enforcement. It is safer for the public for them to take someone into custody there. For those reasons, we object to SB 508. Moving on to 509, if enacted, that would prevent state and local officials from disclosing personal information which would be used for immigration enforcement purposes. It ensures state and local officials would not be involved in immigration enforcement or detention matters. It would prohibit local law enforcement from cooperating with federal officials in immigration enforcement. Specifically, this conflicts with 8 U.S.C. 1373, which says, notwithstanding any other provision of federal, state, or local law, no person or agency may prohibit or any way restrict a federal, state, or local government entity from doing any of the following: sending such information to or requesting information from INS, maintaining such information, or exchanging such information. The idea of wanting to allow information with judicial warrants is what the exception is. The idea of a judicial warrant is simply not possible. Those warrants don't exist. Congress specifically provided for administrative warrants for immigration officials. The U.S. Congress has the ability to decide what kind of due process is affected for aliens. If a Congress wanted to bestow on federal courts the decision-making power, it would have done so. That said, they only required an administrative warrant, and that was not an oversight. Bills like SB 509 handcuff ICE and make it difficult to fulfill its mission. With respect to 510, if enacted, it requires law enforcement to wear uniform that has the officer's name and badge and would prohibit masks. SB 10 demonizes law enforcement officers who are simply trying to protect their identities and keep them and their families safe. Moreover, legislation like SB 10 interferes with ICE's ability to operate safely. It also violates the Supremacy Clause by attempting to regulate federal agencies and forcing them to adopt certain policies. At a time where law enforcement is facing a 1,300% increase in assaults, 3,400% increase in vehicular assaults, and an 8,000% increase in death threats, this legislation sows division and hatred of immigration officials. Ironically, while this bill forbids law enforcement officers from wearing masks to protect themselves, ICE protesters have regularly been depicted in photographs wearing masks. Recently, we have had several instances where there have been assaults on law enforcement officers. Just a couple of days ago in Minneapolis, there was an ICE agent's finger who was bit off. He is now losing that finger. By the rhetoric calling ICE officers Nazis or Gestapo, you are encouraging action by certain protesters and agitators, which is dangerous. New York Post had an article in January 25th where protesters swarmed a hotel that they believed had federal officers staying there. They hurled items at the people inside. They smashed the windows. They put graffiti on the outside using the F-bomb about ICE. And ICE and officers and others inside had to actually use vending machines to block entrance into that hotel. Finally, in November, back around the time you were having this hearing, there was protesters around Chicago in an ICE facility that resulted in 4 officers being injured. Those were not ICE officers, but they were around the ICE facility to keep order. And then in June of 2025 in Portland, there was actually an ICE facility breached, which injured 4 federal officers. They were done by rioters in black clothing. They launched fireworks, and they created a battering ram, which broke into the facility.
Thank you for your testimony, and I appreciate that you flew in and provided some additional detail. I have a question, but first we'll hear from Senator Runstead of his question.
Thank you for flying in to be subjected to the snarky comments and guffaws from the chamber, which when I was a chair never happened. Even if they're on my side, I didn't tolerate the behavior of these people snarking away. My question is the Supremacy Clause. It's pretty clear that under the plenary federal powers that the Supreme Court has ruled repeatedly means that the federal power is almost entirely within immigration to the federal government. And the Constitution says that the Constitution, federal laws under it, and treaties are the supreme law of the land. When federal and state laws conflict, federal law wins. The state judges are bound by it. No state law, city ordinance, or local policy can override federal law. So this is kind of like an exercise in futility here, because all this is illegal, what we're doing under the Supremacy Clause. Would you agree that prohibits so much of what we've discussed here in terms of these bills?
I would believe that the Supremacy Clause will be the law of the land. I know that there was a case in California where California law did exactly what Michigan is attempting to do. That has been challenged, and in fact, the Trump administration has clearly stated they will not abide by that because they firmly believe in the safety of their officers. There was a hearing on that case, January 14th. There has not yet been a ruling on that. So I would encourage.
We will eagerly await, the results from that hearing. Thank you. I did have a question. I'm aware that the founder of your organization in 1993 wrote in a letter that I've come to the point of view that for European American society and culture to persist requires a European American majority, and a clear one at that. And you also have a former Board of Advisors member who said that new cultures in America were diluting what we are and who we are. So I guess my question is, given that that your organization has actually been designated by at least one as a hate group, do you oppose these bills in part because the safeguards for people's rights would make it harder for this current administration, who has people from your organization affiliated within it, to achieve the goals of less people of color in the United States?
First of all, I want to address the whole issue that you insinuated that we're a hate group. We are not. SPLC has designated many organizations that oppose them politically as hate organizations. They are no longer credible and used in a lot of those ways because of some of the things that have been designated, and they have been found not to be true in a lot of their ways. With respect to our organization, we are nonpartisan, we are non-political, and we firmly believe that in the rule of law, and do not believe that, race has anything to do with it or solely focused on the issue at hand, and that's why we oppose those bills.
Thank you for your response. Senator Irwin?
Yeah, right now, across America and across the world, when we have troops deployed in foreign nations, they're identified and they don't cover their faces typically. And we do that so that if we have a situation like the Abu Ghraib situation or some other horrible situation, My Lai massacre, whatever, so that those folks can be held accountable. Here in America, generally speaking, Lansing PD, Ann Arbor Police Department, where I live, they're not masked because we want to make sure that if we're giving them this great responsibility to enforce the law and to do so with a threat of violence, that they need to be held accountable and they themselves need to be held to the law. So do you think that we should adopt this policy of masking law enforcement agents and masking military agents more widely, like ICE has chosen to do? Or do you think that ICE agents should be subjected to, and citizens should have the same protections that citizens in other countries have when they're dealing with our military?
So first, I want to say masked officers are required to carry badges, credentials, and identify themselves. Under Title VIII, it requires identification, and policy has dictated that they identify themselves as soon as practicable. That might not be instantaneously, but they do have to identify themselves as far as that goes.
I just think it's pretty wild that people in Fallujah or Kabul have more protections than American citizens on the streets.
Thank you again. We appreciate hearing from all sides of this issue. And speaking of law enforcement, we actually are going to hear next from Ike McKinnon, who is on Zoom. He is the former Detroit police chief. Chief, welcome, and we're eager to hear your testimony.
Good afternoon, and thank you for inviting me for this opportunity to speak before you. Yes, I'm the retired chief of police of the state of Detroit. I served for 26 years with the Detroit Police Department. I'm a Vietnam veteran. I also was deputy mayor of the city of Detroit and a college professor. I've lectured on police procedure throughout the country, from Michigan, Ohio, Minnesota, Texas, Florida, and wherever it might be. And I've worked in various locations throughout the city and other places, and also worked in undercover. I think the most important thing we have to learn here is that the community has to trust the people that's supposed to be serving them. As a law enforcement officer, my fundamental duty is to serve the community, to safeguard lives and property, protect the innocent against deception, the weak against oppression or intimidation, and respect the constitutional rights of all, the liberty, equality, and justice. There has to be trust for people to understand why people are doing certain things. Look, I've had people who knew me as a law enforcement officer in their city, who knew my name, and they saved my life. I was almost killed on 2 occasions in which people told me that there are people spotted in buildings to shoot and kill me and my partner. Secondly, I chased a person into a building and were confronted by 3 men with AK-47s. And as I walked out of the building with one of the prisoners, these people within that respective community, they came out and stopped those people from killing me because they said, Ike, we know you, we trust you. It's so important for us to understand there has to be trust and understanding. When people wear a mask, you don't know who they are and what they're going to do. This is a scary thing. I go back to 1967, during the riots and rebellion in Detroit, when people tried to take their badges off and their ID cards so people wouldn't identify them. This is what's happening right now. People who are supposed to protect and serve a community should be identified as to who they are and not wear a mask. That's a scary thing when people are doing that and people don't know who they are. And they can basically do what they want to do and the people of that respective community not know who they are. This is scary. So that's why I really support Stephanie Chang, or Senator Chang, and this bill that says you cannot wear a mask when you are serving a respective community, and we see that in certain locations around the country. I've heard people say, well, it's unsafe for the law enforcement officers, but what about the safety of the people of that respective community who are being beaten, who are being shot? And there's no one who's identifying them, and we don't know or protect or feel safe about those people who are supposed to be serving and protecting that respective community. And that's why I really feel that this bill by Senator Chang, 510 and 509, are important to those of us in law enforcement and in our respective communities.
Well, thank you for your dedicated service, and we appreciate your testimony. We do have a question from Senator Runstead.
Yes.
Thank you. I think we can all agree that having masked officers is not the best solution. I think everyone in the country would agree to that. So why is that? It's because there are very, very egregious attacks on these ICE officers. In fact, an 8,000% increase in death threats, more than 1,300% increase in assaults on them, and for them to get home safely to their families, where they take pictures, they dox them, they put their families out there. I'm not sure whether in the Detroit police force you had these kinds of numbers from very often outside paid groups coming in to create this kind of havoc. So it's hard to conflate, I think, your experience with what they're undergoing nationally. And again, I think everyone would agree that's not the ideal solution. So what would you, given these sets of circumstances, what would you advise for their safety?
Senator, I was threatened personally. My family was threatened, and we didn't wear a mask. That is the part of being a law enforcement officer or an officer who's serving and protecting someone. You know this is what you're going in for. And I would say that the majority of law enforcement officers across this country, wherever it might be, feel the same way that I do, that, look, we accept the fact that this is a possibility. You don't want your family or anyone else threatened, but the reality is we want to know who you are, whomever you might be and wherever you might be coming from, you are protecting and serving our community. And this is part of this job that we have. And those people who come from outside the community who are not trained as we are in law enforcement and commit some of the acts that we've seen.
Well, I was referring to the paid protesters, but I've never seen these numbers in the Detroit police. I've never seen these numbers. Okay, can we control the audience here so I can at least express myself with this kangaroo court? So what I was saying is that I don't recall these numbers ever being pointed specifically at the Detroit police officers, where the entire force felt they couldn't get home because of a lot of outside agitation primarily. So it seems like a unique circumstance to me. Again, nobody wants to have them masked.
Senator, I'm not speaking specifically and only of the Detroit Police Department. Mine is throughout the country. And those people, those law enforcement officers that I have come in, and chiefs of police that have come in contact around the country, where I've spoken to, and the officers who say the same thing that I do. Look, you must have the trust of your respective community. You have to have that trust for people to trust you. And there's a lack of trust right now with what's going on when people are wearing masks, when they can't be identified and not know who those people are.
Thank you. Senator Santana?
Thank you, and thank you for your testimony. You touched on training, which I think is something that's really important for all of us to reflect on, especially you have been in military as well as a DPD officer. One of the things that we have heard recently is that the ICE training has been reduced from 22 weeks to 8 weeks of training. And I just want your perspective as a law enforcement agent, whether this accelerated training that has been put in place, drill tactics and everything that you have learned as a law enforcement agent, how does that reflect in the cultural competencies as well as the risk that excessive force may be being used wrongfully when it comes to ICE agents and how they're operating in our communities? We've seen too many citizens being murdered right on the street, and all they're doing is trying to uplift their First Amendment rights and their voices. So I just want to hear from you, being a DPD law enforcement officer, how that compares to what the training that ICE is receiving at a reduced amount of time, how that impacts community engagement as well.
Senator, I think it's much more than the training or the shortened training. I think it has to do with the kind of people that you recruit to go in law enforcement. As I've traveled around the country and spoken to various locations, we talk about this. Who are you recruiting to be involved in this kind of situation? And I think that's one of the most important things. Do you want a person who has an axe to grind? Do you want a person who's done something wrong, or let's say they are an they've traveled from police department to police department and they've done something wrong in one department. It's not just the police department, it's the people that you recruit to those for the kind of job that we have right now. And I really stand by that. It's important to know the kind of people that you're recruiting, the kind of people that you have within your respective community, and secondly, thirdly, the things that are going on. What is the norm for your respective department and the supervision? I mean, I've seen the people who are doing some of the things, and what are the supervisors doing to stop them from committing some of those acts? That's so important. And whether it's the training of the lower ranking officers or all those people who are part of that respective area, there has to be training of everyone and a continued training. And that's important.
Yeah, I definitely believe that the training is very prevalent right now in the culture of ICE and where we are today as a country. Thank you.
Senator Irwin?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for your service. I have no doubt, given what I know about the time and place that you cut your teeth in law enforcement, that you faced plenty of danger and threats, and I appreciate your comments about the importance of trust in terms of the success of the enterprise of law enforcement. It is essential, and so hearing it from you is credible source is great. I want to ask you about something totally different, though, something that I haven't heard much about today, I don't think, which is the safety of officers and law enforcers themselves. It strikes me that if you have masked agents essentially carjacking people, invading homes, this is a situation in a heavily armed, Second Amendment friendly country that could result in great danger, not just for the individuals who are being abducted, but also for the folks who are working in immigration enforcement. And so, yeah, I guess I just want to invite you to talk a little bit about how accountability and identification and doing law enforcement in a straightforward, legal, obvious way can result in safety for the officers themselves. Because I'm concerned about some of the killings I've seen on the street, but I feel like there's more coming, and it's going to be on both sides, and I think that's tragic. So I guess I wanted to invite you to talk about safety of the enforcers as well.
Senator, one of the most important things that I saw or heard in the last couple of weeks was I think there were 23 chiefs of police and other people in the Minneapolis, Minnesota area. And they came and had a press conference saying that some of the ICE people are stopping their people of color who are off-duty police officers, and off-duty officers are bound to carry their weapons. And I think I've done a piece on writing about this, that if someone stops you and you have a gun, as what happened, I think it was this week, what's going to happen with those African-American officers or other people of color who are off-duty law enforcement officers, and someone stops them and we get into a shootout about something like that? There's this possibility. We've had, throughout my long career, throughout this country, there have been these kinds of situations. Now it's going to be exacerbated because of the great number of people who are being stopped. Look, I think that everybody wants their cities and their state to be safe, but we want it done in a good way. Go back to the training, go back to the kind of people that we're recruiting. Who are those people that are stopping people, and what are their orders to do certain things within their respective community? That is so important to me, and I tried and did to stop even in Detroit, officers who did not want to show their badges and not be identified. There has to be identification. There has to be a concrete effort by everyone that's involved to say, look, we want to make everybody safe, not only the officers, but the people within their respective community. We want them to be respected and be respectful. Law enforcement officers, these are now law enforcement officers because they're doing law enforcement officer jobs. And wherever it goes, that has to be looked at and adhered to by everyone involved in this.
Thank you very much, Chief. We appreciate your testimony. Up next, we're going to hear from Isa Villarosa from the Asian Law Caucus, and Isa is joining us on Zoom.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Senators. Thank you so much for your time today. My name is Isa Villarosa, and I'm an attorney with the Asian Law Caucus, the nation's first Asian American civil rights organization. I'm an Oakland County resident, the proud daughter of Filipino immigrants, a doctor and a child care worker committed to leaving this world more just. Earlier, Ms. Randall Affair asked us to trust ICE's discretion and good judgment, but discretion without accountability is only unchecked power. Fair says there is justification for this $85 billion effort to cage folks, leading to the deaths of over 40 people in ICE custody since 2025, including here at the Baldwin North Lake facility, on top of the ICE abuse and killing of U.S. citizens. But this testimony misleads. The vast majority, over 70% of those targeted, have no criminal record, and distracts from the reality that ICE is taking life with rogue authority and a runaway budget. FAIR also misrepresents federal law in their written testimony. The statute they cite, which is 8 U.S.C. 1357 G10, explicitly states that cooperation is voluntary. Federal law does not require states to use their resources for federal immigration enforcement. The Supreme Court confirmed this in Prince v. United States. The federal government cannot commandeer state resources or compel state officers to enforce federal law. SB 509 simply declines voluntary cooperation. This is Michigan's right. So I'm testifying today in support of these bills because what's happening in our state is not immigration enforcement, it's terror. Throughout this administration, I've witnessed firsthand ICE put kids in fear of their lives, prey on loved ones who are no threat to society, who make their communities rich, safe, and whole, pulling them from workplaces, homes, yes, churches, and schools. They're kidnapping our neighbors in real time by the minute. Last summer, when ICE snatched dozens of Michigan refugees in violation of due process, including Lansing auto worker and community leader Liu Yang, elected officials like Senator Chan and Rep. Song joined organizations like mine in asking ICE and DHS for answers about arrests and detentions in their districts. They were blocked. FAIR accuses these bills of sowing division, but division already exists when ICE operates with impunity, when elected officials can't find out if their own constituents are alive. After ICE unlawfully arrested Mohan Karki last April, he spent 9 months in detention, 7 of them at St. Clair County Jail, where he was forbidden from in-person visits with his family because of impermissible no-contact policies that enrich private telecom interests. This month, ICE deported Mohan out of DTW to Bhutan, a country that has no repatriation agreement with the United States, expelling him almost immediately into indefinite, life-threatening statelessness, all before he ever got to hold his 9-month-old daughter. And since last year, we've watched families like Mohan's torn apart with speed, with secrecy, no time to find lawyers, no transparency about whether valid warrants were used. And yes, judicial warrants do exist and are real under the Fourth Amendment. And we're not just talking about immigrants. We're talking about U.S. citizens like Alex Preddy, like Renee Good, exercising their right to keep each other safe. And they paid for that with their lives. This is an American nightmare with irreversible repercussions, including for so many like Mohan and Lou, who survived war and torture abroad and who were welcomed into the U.S. for a second chance of life. And it doesn't have to be this way. SB 508, 509, and 510 address these critical problems. First, masks. These are not for safety, they're for anonymity, and they're an intimidation tactic. It makes it impossible to hold officers accountable when civil rights are violated, when someone gets hurt or killed. Requiring officer identification, basic accountability, these are not controversial things. Secondly, sensitive locations. For the Grand Rapids Lao Dad seized by ICE in a church parking lot last October to this week's Ypsilanti school bus stop targeting, we need policies like this. And third, data privacy. As my own organization's litigation bears out, the IRS is building systems to share millions of taxpayer data with ICE. So people who've paid taxes for decades, built businesses, and raised families here will have their personal information weaponized against them. Bills like SB 509 limit how state resources and data can be used for census targeting. And this all matters here in Michigan because research shows that these bills lead to lower crime rates. When residents, including immigrants, feel secure in their neighborhoods, they participate, they show up, they report crimes, they cooperate with police, and they're here when their community needs them. Now FAIR, a group bent on division, tells us to trust ICE to police itself, to not ask questions. But this is not immigration enforcement. That is the infrastructure of a police state where one federal agency operates with minimal oversight, reduced constitutional protections, and no accountability. Michigan can do better, and these bills are how. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. And I did want to recognize, since you mentioned Lou Yang's story, that his wife Ann is here. Thank you, Ann, for your courageous advocacy. Senator Runstead.
Yes, two quick questions. One, with 8,000 spike in death threats against ICE officers and 1,300% increase in assaults, and you say that nothing that they're doing in terms of masks is for their safety, it's just for intimidation, but there's no safety element. So none of those statistics are either believable or relevant, would you say?
Senator, I would just encourage an assessment of the power imbalance here. Earlier, a peer testified about the possibility of an officer losing a finger. We're looking at civilians who are exercising their constitutional rights, losing their lives. The data borne is really bearing witness to this heightened imbalance of power, and that's why so many of us are here today.
And secondly, under the Supremacy Clause, you're correct that you cannot commandeer local resources, but in terms of federal enforcement of immigration laws, saying that a state's going to pass these laws that we will not cooperate, we will prevent ICE or the federal government from coming in and enforcing it in different locations. Your understanding of this Supremacy Clause is that states, locals do have the right to prohibit the feds from enforcing immigration laws. Is that your position?
My comment earlier was specifically around the FAIR's use of 8 U.S.C. 1357G. And this does go back to this concept of checks and balances, which is enshrined in our Constitution. I'm happy to share with senators this case of Prince v. United States, which makes it very clear that these checks and balances do permit the bills before us today.
Thank you so much. Up next, we are going to hear from Detroit City Councilwoman Gabriela Santiago Romero, who is on Zoom.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. As has been mentioned, my name is Gabriela Santiago Romero. I am a proud immigrant born in Mexico. I became a legal naturalized citizen with my mom through the process, and would just like to say that times look very different now. That process is under threat, and it's incredibly difficult for anyone to achieve the American dream. And I am incredibly privileged and honored to call Detroit home for over the past 30 years. I am now the proud city council member representing District 6. I have over 90,000 residents, and I'm here to speak in support of Senate Bills 508, 509, and 510. I know firsthand what these federal immigration enforcers are doing in our communities. School attendance in Detroit and many of our schools has gone down, some of them down by 50% in attendance because parents and children are afraid to leave their homes after witnessing students, young people, with no criminal records, like Carly, Anthony, Moore, and Santiago, be torn apart from their families. Local businesses are struggling to stay afloat because people are afraid to patronize their shops, or their employees are afraid to show up to work. Families are literally starving with lack of resources to address any medical needs. Folks are tapping into mutual aid to be able to pay bills, to be able to get groceries for their families. Residents can't even find comforts in places of worships or go through the lawful immigration process because they are afraid to show up to their court hearings, knowing that so many people are currently being taken hundreds of miles away and deported. I'm here to really emphasize the real fear, the real impacts that are happening in Detroit, across the state and across the country, and to make it very clear that ICE and immigration enforcers, federal enforcers, are not making our communities any more safe. This is not a undocumented immigrants versus citizen issue. U.S. citizens are terrified right now. I have Black, white, Native newcomers in the city of Detroit who are fearful after witnessing the brutal murders of Keith Porter, Renee Good, and Alex Preddy. Again, this is just a reminder that it's important to hear directly from people that are being impacted. There's a lot of being shared in the media, a lot of thoughts, a lot of misinformation, but I'm here to let you know that ICE agents in our cities are clearly violating our rights. They are manufacturing chaos and fear. This is making it so our residents are afraid to even call on to police, and as has been shared, when our residents don't call local police officers, we are not any more safe. As elected officials, it is our job to protect our communities and our constituents. I believe that we are all here asking our state legislators to be proactive in protecting our residents, and I do implore you to please pass Senate Bills 508, 509, and 510. These are legislation pieces that I'm hoping to mirror here in the city of Detroit as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Councilmember, for your courageous leadership and for your testimony. All right, up next, we are going to hear from Yusuf Rabi, who today is here in his capacity with the Michigan Nurses Association.
Thank you, Chair. Committee members, senators, thank you for the honor of being here before you today to testify. I am here in my role as Legislative Director for the Michigan Nurses Association, and I'm actually here on a hiatus from my paternity leave. So I wanted to make an exception and come here today to participate in this committee and to speak to a perspective that I think is very important. And before I testify fully to the merits of the bill, I do want to acknowledge something that was mentioned earlier, and that is the murder of Alex Preddy. And the reason I think that that's so important for me to bring up as the legislative director for the Michigan Nurses Association, which is an association that represents 14,000 nurses and healthcare professionals across Michigan, is because our members watched with shock when Alex was gunned down in the street. And I think that that shock was compounded when it was discovered that Alex was a nurse, an ICU nurse at a VA hospital who was caring for our veterans, caring for some of our most vulnerable residents. And I think that that shock wave has gone through the entire nursing community in Michigan right now. Nurses are people who step up every day, who clock into work to care for the people of Michigan. When somebody walks through those doors, bleeding, in pain, with cancer, a brain tumor, they are there to care for them or to give birth. Me and my wife were just in the hospital giving birth to our son. And I have to say the power of the nursing community that was there, the nurse midwives, they were there to care for us. They didn't care about anything else than our safety, our well-being. And I can tell you that one of the things that inspires me about working for the Nurses Association is that these folks show up to work every day with one thing in mind, and that is the care of their patients. So when we're talking about this bill, I want to zero in on something that I think is the most relevant to our organization, which is making sure that hospitals are safe. Hospitals should be a place of healing and hope, not fear and terror. When somebody goes into a hospital to seek care, they are at their most vulnerable state. All this bill is saying is that federal agents have to comply with our Constitution, which guards against unreasonable searches and seizures and requires warrants. And when you're at a hospital, the last thing that you should be thinking about is your immigration status or fear, even if you are not an undocumented immigrant. We are seeing ICE killing American citizens, disappearing lawful residents. I am the son of an immigrant who became an American citizen. I am fearful for our family. We have nurses all across Michigan who are in the same position, who are naturalized as U.S. citizens or are U.S. citizens themselves, who are showing to work now in fear of what might happen because, in anticipation of a question that Senator Runstead may ask, yes, there have been enforcement activities at hospitals. Yes, we have seen this happen. This has happened in Minneapolis. It has even happened in Michigan. At places where people should be healing, they are now in fear for their lives, for their livelihoods, for their jobs. It is not okay. And that's why I'm so grateful that those of you who drafted and put forward these bills have done so. The last thing I want to say is on the masking point. Our nurses are already overstretched, and healthcare professionals are already working harder and harder to try to meet the needs of the patients that we have in Michigan. Nurses and healthcare professionals are doing this because it is in their heart to help. They are already getting threats. Workplace violence is already on the rise from patients, from visitors, and et cetera. To add on to that, masked individuals showing up to the hospital and not knowing what to do, not knowing how to interact with those people, that is adding a level of fear and intimidation to the job that is already so difficult. So I want to thank you for putting forward these bills. The Michigan Nurses Association is proud to support all three of these bills and happy to take questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, and congratulations again. Senator Santana.
I want to thank you for your testimony, and I just wanted to uplift the nurses across our state and across the country who their sole job is to make sure that they help heal people within the hospital boundaries. But I want to also bring up a very relevant point or just ask the question. Here in Michigan, we have a lot of nurses who cross over the bridge every day from Canada to Michigan in order to actually work here in our state. I'm just wondering, how is that impacting them as well, who are not citizens of the United States, who are here to actually just do their job?
I think there's a massive impact on them. I want to also remind the committee that the United States has several longstanding programs, especially with nurses in the Philippines. There are other, not just Canada, there's other countries as well where nurses do come and provide care here, and there's longstanding precedent for that. And I will say that, you know, as international nurses, there is that fear is compounded 10 times when you cross that border. Because, again, we are seeing these unprecedented enforcement tactics against people of all different status. Regardless of your status, there is enforcement happening. And so there is that level of fear and intimidation and uncertainty, not knowing what's going to happen when you cross that border.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Up next, we are going to hear from Andrew Reinell, who is a parent and organizer with 482 Forward.
Good afternoon. My name is Andrew Reinell. I am Deputy Director at 482 Forward, an education justice coalition in Detroit. I am here in support of Senate Bills 508, 509, 510, and Senate Resolution 86. Normally, it would not be me here before you speaking, because as a community organizer, I tend to hold a bias towards inviting people directly affected by the issues to step into their power in the public arena. But these are not normal times, and we all know that. Just last week, we had a parent and close partner in our network who was pulled over by a masked, unidentifiable ICE agent. So, by the way, who knows if it was actually a federal agent, who then proceeded to launch the most unhinged line of questioning and tirade before finally letting her go. And she considers herself to be one of the luckier ones, because we've had other people in our network who have been swept up throughout Metro Detroit without regard for their civil rights, without regard for their human dignity, and without regard to sensitivity of location. And now we have seen that horror extend to other places in Michigan as well, including recently Ypsilanti. So that's the reason why something like 508 is so important, to at least do something to curtail the unchecked power of ICE and Customs and Border Patrol. I'm also the son of immigrants, and I know people with multiple different levels of immigration status. But I will tell you that even people that are naturalized U.S. citizens are now scared to do something so basic as to fulfill their sacred duty of voting in the midterm elections. Right? I know people that believe that the federal government would dare do something as go into the records and retaliate against them for doing the wrong thing. Some of you might roll your eyes and say that's a leftist fear. I'm here to tell you that some of those naturalized U.S. citizens do not identify with the left, right? But they do have lived experience with dictatorships and authoritarianism. And they are warning us that we are losing our country if we haven't lost it already. The last thing I'll say is that those who study history know, and we have a responsibility of naming it, that the behavior of many of these federal agents, it is not a stretch to make a connection between their behavior and the behavior of the Ku Klux Klan, or their behavior and the behavior of King George III's troops. That is not a stretch. There needs to be a check on their power. Absolute power leads to absolute corruption. And so I'm going to finish off by simply saying their names: Keith Porter, Renee Good, Alex Preddy. I believe we honor their legacy by using our power for the people. Not for party, not for supreme leader, but for the people. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions? Okay. Up next, we're going to hear from Lindsay Matson for My Students Dream, who's joining us on Zoom.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Thank you for having me today. My name is Lindsay Matson. I'm a social worker and community organizer in Detroit. I work with students, parents, and educators who are passionate about improving our schools here in the city. And I'm here to ask that the committee the committee supports Senate Bill 508 through 510. I've personally had youth detained and deported over the past year, as well as youth whose parents have been detained and deported. These people are not criminals. They came in the legal way as asylum seekers who have been following all court orders, and they were taken away. What I really want to spend my time today, though, doing is uplifting the stories of two people, a student and a teacher in Detroit Public Schools. Because of the timing of these hearings, they aren't able to be here to testify, so I'm going to share their stories. Up first, we have a story from an anonymous student at Cass Technical High School who's from an immigrant family. She says, I, as well as many other students in the Detroit Public Schools Community District, feel extremely threatened by the presence of ICE and customs enforcement in our neighborhoods. Masked officers dressed as if they're handling war criminals should not be in or near our schools with young children who have not committed any crimes. I know myself and many of my classmates are nervously catching up on the news every day, frightened by the drastic increase of power ICE receives every day. My parents barely let me leave the house aside from school because they're worried about my safety. I'm concerned about transparency. These officers are covering their faces and not clearly wearing badges. How would we know if we're being kidnapped or taken by ICE? They're acting with brute force to lawful civilians and arresting legal residents. 9 deaths have been related to ICE in just 1 month into 2026 alone. These officers are not acting lawfully and have been given too much power. They've been recklessly terrorizing communities all across the nation. Currently, United States Immigration and Customs Enforcement has an astronomical budget. Not only that, but ICE also has a budget that's more than 125 countries' entire military spending. This is a reckless use of taxpayer dollars to arrest people who are not criminals. Most undocumented people do not commit any crimes. They pay all their taxes. They do not receive government benefit in return. These people only help our economy grow, and spending this much money just to deport them will hurt us even more. Not only that, but ICE have been found to racially profile their random interrogations. Immigration status is now only determined by the color of your skin. The amount of immigrants deported from countries with people of color are drastically more than the immigrants deported from richer, whiter nations. The United States Constitution forbids discrimination on the basis of race as stated in the Equal Protection Clause. If our lawmakers truly care about upholding the values we build this nation on, they will support the adopting of Senate Bills 508 through 510, which will increase accountability for ICE agents and increase safety for Michigan's young people. Thank you, from an anonymous Cass Technical student. And the second story I want to share is from a teacher who I've been working with really closely. Her name is Kristen Shuttle. She works at Western International here in Detroit. She says, hello, my name is Kristen Shuttle, and I'm a teacher at Detroit Public Schools. I want to speak out in support of Senate Bills 508, 509, and 510 to limit the power of ICE in Michigan and in my community. Over the past year, our school climate has plummeted. Our mental health is at an all-time low. I've had 5 of my students taken by ICE, and I've had dozens of my students' family members taken. Kids and parents with ongoing asylum cases and legal permission to be in this country are taken by masked men in unmarked cars, sometimes on their way to school. My student's house was raided at 5 a.m. with guns pointing at her because ICE was looking for a friend of her aunt's who doesn't even live there and never has. This child is still in a prison in Texas 2 months later. Our streets are not safe. Our schools are not safe. We live in fear every day. So with these stories, we're really encouraging you all to pass these bills. Students, teachers, parents that I work with in Detroit are scared, and we'd really appreciate increasing accountability and transparency. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate you sharing those testimonies from a student and a teacher. We do have a question from Senator Runstead.
I'm not surprised at some of the testimony of people having concerns based upon the experts that get the messaging out there. And 2 of the experts posted this week, the sheriff of Washtenaw County and the Ypsilanti superintendent, that a mother was picked up in front of the child, and that they were picked up at a bus stop. So the Washtenaw County Sheriff had to post today that it's inaccurate, all inaccurate. The same thing with the superintendent, inaccurate. But you could see how that could create fear, I would hope, among people with this emotional, and what ICE is just a pack of lies. So you have to be concerned. Well, they just retracted it. They just retracted it. So you could see why there's a lot of concern about accuracy of information, I would hope. Is that something you have any concern about, or you have no problem with what the Washtenaw County Sheriff and the Superintendent of Ypsilanti Schools said recently online?
I'm speaking for Detroit youth who I work with directly and with teachers. These aren't inaccurate. The two stories that I just shared are highly documented. There's photos, there's videos. So I can't speak to other issues, but the two stories that I just shared, the student who was held at gunpoint is still locked up in a Texas facility. We've seen, more than 5 DPSCD students detained, some of them deported, and it's not a lie. I don't understand the question, I guess.
No, we don't know the context in this situation. Thank you.
All right. We're going to move on to Chloe Root, who is a teacher from the Ann Arbor Public Schools, who is also joining us on Zoom.
Thank you. I just want to make sure you all can hear me because we have a jazz band playing at the time. Is everyone able to hear?
Yep, go ahead.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much for your attention today. My name is Chloe Root, and I'm a high school social studies teacher in Ann Arbor. I have the honor of being the only government teacher in our small public school. And the week before this one, before the shooting of Alex Preddy, I gave finals for my government class. Even though I field many student questions about the federal government's deployment of ICE, the Border Patrol, National Guard, I don't teach anything explicitly about ICE. It's not in our curriculum. Every semester we have a question on the final about how our government system works to prevent abuse of power. And I was really surprised to see that 5 students in one class independently cited ICE as an example of checks and balances and federalism failing to prevent abuse of government power, whether because of unlawful detention and searches, racial profiling, violence against protesters or detainees, including the crowd of students pepper sprayed at Roosevelt High School in Minneapolis. I'm so glad that you are considering Senate Bill 508. Students are scared, even in a city where we don't have a large undocumented population. They are getting the same texts from friends that we teachers are, that ICE picked up a parent after dropping off his elementary school student last year in our district, or seeing the reports from other states where children are being used as bait to try to lure their parents into ICE custody. As Ms. Mattson mentioned, this is not about protecting anyone from violent criminals. Reporting used in U.S. House proceedings shows that even since last fall, the majority of people in U.S. detention have no criminal record. Even those who do have a criminal record, it's a tiny, tiny fraction that have actually even been accused of violent crimes. The fear and disruption that are caused by this overreach of the federal government is not worth whatever gains are purported. And the much bigger danger is the erosion of the rule of law that ICE officers across the nation are feeding. When I began teaching, the doors to our schools and classrooms were open and unlocked. Our office staff didn't have to do double duty to monitor doors and screen individuals coming into the building. We've already faced the disruption and fear caused by active shooter drills, which are unfortunately a necessity. And I'm constantly bewildered when other adults wring their hands about why students are so anxious and depressed. We're failing as a society to give them any sense of security. And like many of us, they're constantly worried about acts of violence against innocent individuals. They shouldn't have to be worried that those acts of violence are going to be committed by their governments. Teachers and other school staff are working so hard to make our students feel safe and supported in a time that is really chaotic and challenging. So please help us to do our jobs and take care of our students the way that we want to and the way that we're supposed to. And please keep ICE out of schools by passing SB 508.
Thank you so much. We appreciate your testimony. Up next, we are going to hear from Detective Sergeant Ted Nelson, retired, on behalf of LEAP, who is on Zoom.
Hello. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay. Madam Chairman, distinguished members of the committee, my name is Ted Nelson. I'm a retired Detective Sergeant with the Michigan State Police, where I served for over 25 years in patrol, criminal investigations, narcotic investigations, and a lot of officer training. I am today speaking as a speaker of the Law Enforcement Action Partnership, or LEAP, and as you probably know, it's an international group of police, prosecutors, judges, and other criminal justice professionals And like Chief McKinnon spoke, and I don't need to go into all the detail about LEAP, and he spoke about that. My concern as a police officer, as a state trooper, our focus as a state police officer was to serve the public, to not hide who you were or what you were doing. Law enforcement has changed dramatically since I left the field. I went into teaching, and I taught at different community colleges in the criminal justice field, and I also taught at a career tech center for high school students who had an interest in entering law enforcement. I believe in law enforcement. I believe that law enforcement and the community need to rely on each other to do the job that needs to be done. Law enforcement has to have respect from a community to be efficient and effective. Without that, they are nothing more than they cannot accomplish their goals without the community's support. When I see things that are being done by ICE on television, the techniques they are using are nothing that I've ever seen taught or trained in law enforcement. When they put 6 or 7 people on one person for whatever they did, that's not a customary way to apprehend people. When you apprehend people, your job is to apprehend them safely, to put handcuffs on them, which normally doesn't take more than 2 officers, 3 at the most, and you don't beat them with whatever you have in your hands. That is not part of your job. Your job is to arrest people, enforce the law, and put them in custody without having to go to the hospital first. That was how I was trained. That's how I told students. I can't believe what I'm seeing. I'm seeing angry mobs of militarized federal agents going out there and doing things that I never, ever thought I would see being done in our communities. Local and state police and county police, that's not how they operate. And wearing masks, that just, whenever people wear masks, you are trying to hide identity. Now, you can say it's to protect their families, but I'm not sure that most of these ICE officers are from these communities where they're operating. They're from all over the country. I never was concerned about hiding my identity, even when I was an undercover narcotics police officer. Wearing masks is an invitation to do whatever you want to without having accountability. It is not to protect your family. It is to do things that you could not get away with without it. It's the same reason criminals commit crimes in darkness, because if you can't see them, it's hard to catch them. I am appalled, I am discouraged, and I believe that if this continues, that all law enforcement, not just ICE officers or border officers, all officers are going to lose respect by the community, lose trust by the community, and when that happens, our country has left democracy, our country has gone to anarchy, and the citizens are not going to stand for it. Police are always going to be outnumbered by citizens. And if the citizens don't support the police, they have a right to protest, they have an obligation to protest. And I believe that ICE is destroying that. Border control being sent up to Minnesota is destroying that. And I really fear for the future of our country. And I would like to see Senate Bill 508, 509, 510 seriously considered, so we don't have people out there who either legally carry guns, like the Second Amendment allows, who are getting killed by agents, 6 or 7 of them, strong-arming something to the ground. I'm not even sure what he was arrested for, spraying people directly in the face with pepper spray, the size of containers I've never even seen used in law enforcement. I am in fear of what the future of our country is going to be. And these protests are being done all over the country. not just in Minneapolis. People are afraid. Fear is not a good way to control people. It doesn't work. It hasn't in the past, and it won't in the future. Thank you for allowing me to talk.
I appreciate your testimony and your dedicated service for so many years. Thank you so much. Up next, I know that we are over time. We're going to take a couple more testifiers. And up next, we're going to hear from Jenny Hooper from First Step.
Good afternoon, Chair and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify on Senate Bill 508. My name is Jenny Hooper, and I am the Interim Executive Director of First Step, Wayne County's comprehensive domestic violence and sexual assault agency. Each year, we serve nearly 7,000 survivors and their children through free confidential crisis intervention, shelter, counseling, and advocacy, legal advocacy. At its core, SB 508 is about one simple principle. Survivors must be able to seek safety without fear. Fear of immigration enforcement should never become another tool of abuse. In domestic violence, sexual assault, and trafficking cases, immigration status is routinely weaponized by abusers. We see threats of deportation, interference with immigration paperwork and court dates, the taking or destruction of identification and legal documents. For many survivors, the threats of being reported to immigration authorities becomes just as powerful as physical violence. This keeps them trapped. This is not just what we see at First Step. It is what national research confirms. 3 out of 4 immigrant survivors report fear of contacting law enforcement, and many avoid courts, hospitals, and service providers for that very same reason. Advocates across the country report survivors withdrawing from protection orders and criminal cases because of deportation fears. When safe spaces like domestic violence agencies, shelters, hospitals, courts, and schools are not clearly protected, survivors face an impossible choice. Risk detention or deportation by asking for help, or stay in danger, sometimes with deadly consequences. This is why SB 508 matters. This bill helps ensure that when someone is fleeing violence or seeking medical care or trying to protect their children, they can do so without fear that those very systems will be used against them. There is also a critical operational reality. Domestic violence and sexual assault agencies like First Step are bound by strict federal and state confidentiality laws and funding requirements of our public funding. We are legally required to protect survivors' identities, locations, and records. Unpermitted law enforcement access to our space could force us into legal violations and put survivors in danger. If our confidentiality is compromised or our services are disrupted, we risk losing the federal and state funding that keeps shelter doors open, advocates available, and crisis lines staffed. That destabilizes the survivor safety net that Michigan relies on. When survivors can safely access services, violence is interrupted, families stabilize, and perpetrators are more likely to be held accountable. And communities are safer. Survivors should never have to choose between their safety and their freedom, or their children's well-being and their immigration status. SB 508 offers Michigan a clear and responsible way to protect survivors, preserve access to life-saving services, and keep our safety systems functioning as intended. Thank you for your time and your thoughtful consideration.
Thank you so much. Appreciate all the work that you do every day. And we do have one question from Senator Brunstad.
Excellent.
Thank you. And I was down at the border with 3 different times and learned how the system works. And a lot of times you have these unaccompanied minors. There was 490,000 reported by Border Patrol, came through between 21 and 2024. And they said the boys usually would work in fentanyl factories in Mexico. The girls would come over and they'd have bracelets for which cartel they owed money. So they'd send them to like Houston and they would turn tricks. Little girls, 490,000. Very often we weren't able to test was the person bringing them over the actual biological person. They prohibited that, the Biden administration. So all of these girls, and by the way, were most of them being put to work by American citizens? No, they were by cartels, they were by people here illegally. So to me, all the Border Patrol was so concerned about these girls. They weren't concerned about deporting these girls. They wanted to go after the traffickers. So is there going to be a strong fight by your organization to go after these traffickers, which is what ICE is trying to do, is get these people out of the country?
This is merely for us to be very proactive in supporting survivors. So we support all survivors.
That's what I'm interested in too. And getting after these traffickers out is what I would like to do.
I guess I'll ask a follow-up question.
Sure.
Or a question then. I mean, would you believe then if the concern is making sure they're holding traffickers accountable, it's important to make sure that those who are being trafficked are able to receive services
100%.
at the organizations that currently are places where immigration enforcement is allowed under the rescission of the sensitive locations policy?
So it would be vital for us to be able to provide those services and for us to be able to stay open. So all survivors are welcome.
Thank you so much. Again, I know we are over time. We're going to take 2 more. Eileen Hayes from Michigan Faith in Action and Catherine Log, I think, if they are here. And if you're in another room, okay. Just so we can keep moving here, is Caitlin Green here? Okay. I also people might have left, or Charlie Fox. Okay, I'm not sure where these cards came from. So the other 2 that had submitted cards were Marita Kai and John Sfredo. Okay, I think Marita is here. So we will hear from Marita. And then if any of the other names that I just said, if you're still here and you wanted to speak, we can take 1 more.
Hello, hello committee and Chair Chang. Sorry. I won't be long because a lot of folks have testified and gave really good testimonies. We've heard from experts and people who are affected by the unchecked power of these criminals, ICE agents. These people are not law enforcement. They are empowered, emboldened gang, and they are very violent towards peoples in our communities. And we hear the stories that we've heard in the news, and these are facts, real stories, from Minnesota to our communities in Michigan, and the violence and also the murders committed by ICE agents with masks, without their identifications, are very enraging if you are human beings with any hearts. And even if you don't see that people who may not have the color of my palm or like turn red in the sun that deserve humanities, these ICE agents are also going after white people who dare to stand up against them, and these are not acceptable. Everyone in the United States, citizens or permanent residents, anyone have due process. We are entitled, and these are our constitutional rights to be protected and stand up against unwarranted searches and everyone has the right to defend themselves, especially folks like Alex, who tragically passed. He carried a concealed weapon. It's unacceptable that he was murdered by these gang ICE agents who feel emboldened to do whatever they want to do and feel that they would be protected by people like Jimmy Runestad, no matter what they do. And Jimmy,
Okay.
I will not accept
We're
any
actually
question.
we have our Senate rules which call for decorum, and we don't insult other
Okay, I'm
members.
sorry.
Here, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your testimony. Are there any questions? Okay. Up next, and again, this is going to be our last person just due to time. It is Eileen Hayes from Michigan Faith in Action. To the others who submitted cards, you're welcome to submit some written testimony. Apologies that we did not get you. We will likely have one more committee hearing to vote out the bills, and if you're available then, we'd love to hear you. But Eileen, we're looking forward to your testimony.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Senator Chang, and to the committee. Thank you for allowing me this opportunity to speak. As you know, my name is Eileen Hayes. I'm the Executive Director of Michigan Faith in Action. And like many you've heard today, we're all angered and shocked and outraged by the over-policing that has been allowed to happen from ICE agents in the country. We'd like to see that stopped. So we are very encouraged and very supportive of this common sense legislation being brought forth by our great state. We are very pleased to see that this piece of legislation is something that's in the right direction that will help our residents move in a way that they can have their dignity honored, their safety and the way in which they lead their lives upheld. We already know that many of our residents, even in the city of Flint, where I live, are afraid to leave their houses. They're afraid to go to church. They're afraid to lead their daily lives because they don't know what's going to happen to them. We're having to form teams of people who have to deliver groceries to other families because these families are afraid to do their regular day-to-day operations. This is not normal, and we don't want to normalize this kind of operations in the U.S. of A. So right now, we are extremely supportive of these bills. So you have our full support to have this happen. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And again, apologies that we didn't get to everyone. We will do our best to accommodate. And again, written testimony is also very welcome. We have an incredibly large stack of testimony cards, which we don't have time to read in, but they will be in the minutes. And then do you want to lift up the stack we have a lot of emails that will also all go into the official record. And I know that many more are coming in. So I just want to thank everyone for being here and want to recognize that I know that we are in really dark times, but I also have so much hope given all of the incredible work that is being done to protect our fellow community members. So just thank you again for your participation. And I move to excuse the absent members, and without objection, the motion carries. Being no further business, the Senate Committee on Civil Rights, Judiciary, and Public Safety is now adjourned.